Hello, Guru Nation. How are you guys doing? Welcome back to another episode. I've got Kunal Sampat on. He's Director of Clinical Operations for Cerebell. He's up in the Bay Area in the Greater San Francisco, San Jose megapolis. How's it going, Kunal?
Good, Dan. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you for coming on. So Cerebell is where you work. You also have a clinical coach LLC. We're going to get into a little bit of that. You also have a podcast that you've been doing for, I don't know now. How many years has it been?
It's been maybe 3.5, 4 years, 4 years maybe.
Wow. What's the podcast called again?
It's Clinical Trial Podcast.
Perfect name. Clinical Trial Podcast, guys. So Clinical Trial Podcast. I listen. It's so well produced. Like you have show notes, you have like a transcripts, you have timestamp. Everything is like how a podcast should be, right? Not like this one, guys. We're just throwing up a lot of shots over here on my end, right? We're volume. Kunal is like quality, but now we got a quality episode for you guys too, because it's not just me rambling for half an hour. It's Kunal. We're gonna talk director of clinical operations. We're gonna talk what that even means. We're going to talk project manager, how he survived being a project manager, and we're going to talk about what he does to help others. So, with that being said, welcome, Kunal.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I also want to just thank you for just being an amazing resource for the clinical research industry and just all the work that you've done. I know you said quantity versus quality. All that is just blur at the end of the day, at the end of our lives, and I just think the impact you're having is massive. So
Thank you
thanks
for
for
that.
doing what you're doing.
Thank you for that. I like that definition, impact. It makes me feel better. Like, hey, just throw these things out. If you make an impact, like one episode a month or one episode an hour, it doesn't matter as long as the impact is there. I like that, Kunal. There's a book in there. We could write a book on that topic.
Mm.
So Kunal, can you just give, like, for the people who don't know you, because it's been a while since you've been on, can you give like a 3-minute Cliff Notes version of your career and kind of how
Sure.
you get to where you are right now?
Sure. So I actually started my career in clinical research at ParExcel. A lot of people probably know about ParExcel. It's a clinical research organization. I started it on the East Coast at the main office. I was working at Perceptive Informatics, which is part of the ParExcel family, doing medical imaging, CRA kind of work, but in-house CRA. And from there, I started working at Abbott Labs, where I worked for almost 12 years, managing clinical trials as a program manager, project manager, and mostly all my experiences in medical devices and cardiology medical devices. And then most recently, I've been working at a startup Dan mentioned about, Cerebell, that does medical devices, which is EEG based, medical diagnostic medical device. I
That's
also
cool.
teach clinical trials at San Jose State University, so that's something I've been doing in addition to the podcast that I host. My background is in engineering and computer science, actually, and I studied nonprofit administration and some other courses, in statistics and so on, to just kind of get my ball bearings around the medical field, because as you can tell, as an engineer, I didn't really have that exposure or that learning on the medical side. So I had to kind of learn the ropes as I progressed in my career.
Wow. So you're slowly on your way to becoming a generalist with all these different skill sets that you're picking up here and there. Is that what led you to consulting, or what is that about?
Yeah, generalist, I like that word. Yeah, I do like the breadth, but also like keeping the depth, like in clinical trials and regulatory affairs in some ways. I'm very passionate about teaching, and this is what kind of why I started the podcast, and I also teach at San Jose State University. Um, I'll be honest, I haven't done a whole lot with my consulting because just my day job has been quite busy. But I have been, just taking on opportunities as they come by, helping organizations. I worked on a regulatory affairs project recently, doing some consulting work for them, just to kind of have a variety in my experience. So, and I can and learn and contribute more to the industry.
Wow. Okay. So that's big time. I know regulatory affairs is in such high demand right now. What are you
Mm.
seeing in like 2021? Hard to believe this year's almost over, but this has been a insanely busy year, right?
Yeah, yeah, it has been. It's been pretty hectic. I think it's been very hard to hire people as well. I'll be honest. I think CRAs and just clinical research professionals. It's just hard to find good people with skills and talent and attitude and the hustle and wanting to. I think people are changing jobs more frequently. I find, like, I'm noticing that quite a bit. Yeah, and it's been just busy. I think health has been more important than ever, and partly because of, I feel, COVID, but also just the innovation that's happening. With, at least on the medical device front. I mean, with machine learning and AI, and like all the industries are kind of really going upside down in some ways, or is that, I don't even know if that's the right word, but
Topsy
traditional,
turvy.
yeah, topsy turvy. The old technology is now kind of being accelerated or being morphed into this new technology. For example, the EEG product that I'm working on, we have EEGs. Like, there is, hospitals have EEG systems, which is which measures brain waves, and tells you whether or not you're having seizures. But now with machine learning, you can actually train the computer to read if whether or not you're having a seizure. So you don't need, I mean, you need a doctor to give the final clinical diagnosis, but the computer can in many ways say whether or not you're having a seizure. So these devices are being trained to read your brain waves, and you can do it in a matter of 5 minutes versus waiting for a EEG tech to show up at your door, at the hospital for 2 hours to 4 hours, which is a very long time if you're having a seizure and you're not knowing what to do, or your
Yeah.
doctor not knowing what to do. So I'm just amazed, and I think this is transforming a lot of different, like, sectors within, or not sectors, but different therapeutic areas, I think, in medicine. um and like I said, COVID also kind of just increased emphasis on the health field.
Yeah.
um
It
yeah.
strained the resources too. I think one of the reasons why we're having, and I mean, this is the vaccine mandate is just something very recent. So it's has nothing to do. I know a lot of people are commenting on my Instagram and LinkedIn like, hey, yeah, the industry is changing, but it's changing for the worse with the mandates and we have CRAs quitting. I'm not even gonna get into that.
Yeah, that's
the
okay.
the industry's been strained long before this. This is
That's right.
new, right? So I think COVID displaced a lot of jobs. I think COVID, because of all the COVID studies,
Yeah.
like a lot of the best resources, sites, CRAs, coordinator went to COVID studies. But
Mm.
you have all these other studies that are still going on and
Ongoing,
like
yeah.
new stuff, right? Like EEG has nothing to do with COVID,
Yep.
right? But you guys have studies, like, that's a new IND,
Yeah.
um, or whatever it is for a
Yeah,
medical
it's not.
device,
Yeah,
right?
well, it depends on the type of device, but in this case, it's actually, there's no IDE involved, which is
Okay.
equivalent to an IND, because it's a FDA cleared medical device for clinical research use. So you don't really, and it's a diagnostic tool. It doesn't need. You're not actually implanting anything in the patient,
Okay.
so
Okay.
there's less risk, which means you don't need an IDE. Versus if you needed, there was more risk to the patients, then you probably need an IDE.
Okay.
I'm just
Okay.
oversimplifying it for
Yeah.
our purposes, but it's really a class two medical device, so there is less risk relatively to, usually class three medical devices are the ones that need an IDE.
Or
I
a
think the
510K, right? Or
510K, yeah, this is a 510K device, but it's already
okay.
FDA cleared. Hmm.
I gotcha. I gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have. There's a lot. There's so much to learn in this space. I helped somebody once on a 510K, and I actually
Mhm.
went through the process, and we had to later call in some professionals to actually do it, but it was I went through the whole thing. Like I did the whole thing,
Yeah,
searching for the predicate device, all that stuff. There's so much to
exactly.
learn in this space, guys. This is related to what we're talking about because you have COVID, now you have all this other stuff. So we need more people working in research. What's been like, you've probably as a PM and now definitely as a director of operations, you've been in charge of other employees, right? Like,
Mhm.
what is one of the biggest things, like, to make somebody a successful clinical researcher, CRA or PM? Like, what are some of the things you look for when you're hiring or
Mm.
training? Like, what is like if you had to pick like a few things they absolutely need? everybody absolutely needs these skill sets, what would it be?
Yeah, I'm actually not a technical skill set type of person. I know people get hung up on like, oh, have you gotten your ACRP certification or your SOCRA, whatever, and all those things are good. Actually, I think in many ways I would prefer if you didn't have much experience.
Really?
Yeah, because you. I think I was just reading this book by Adam Grant, Think Again, and he says when people have little knowledge, they tend to have overconfidence, more confidence in their ability and their skills. They try to judge themselves better. Versus if they're like absolute beginners, and they tend not to. They're more open to learning and actually being a better
Hmm.
team member. So going back to your question, I think for me, I'm really looking for somebody who can adapt to different situations, because I feel like working for a big company and a small company, I know like nothing is constant, and we're always like, forget about COVID for a second, but just there's just a lot of change, and your responsibility will vary, and there'll be different demands from you based on the season. So I think being able to adapt to different situations rather than having a whole like drama around like you being asked to do something differently, and I think you just kind of need to embrace it as quickly as possible. So adoption is very important, whether it's technology, adopting to different people, adopting to different scenarios, challenges. I think all around. The second one is, I would say, attitude. I think is very critical. I feel like having a can-do attitude. um I'm finding this and I'm observing this. I think people are just so quick to like, let's just outsource this, let's just have somebody else do this. And but like, are you actually taking the time to do it? Like, do you know how to do it? And are you investing the time to learn new skills yourself? And I think
Right.
that can do attitude is really critical for me. And then the third skill I do appreciate, and I don't think everybody likes this, but it just being more like candid and having more open conversations with your team and your manager. I think people are just afraid of the repercussions. Like, they may be, they may get demoted, people may not like them, and all these issues come up. And I think that's more of a management issue. I feel like many managers are not candid because they've been trained not to be candid. But I feel like there's a lot of value in in being open and transparent, because it helps build trust and it helps moves clinical research forward at the end of the day. So I think those are the top three things that are like kind of coming up on my mind right now as we're speaking.
Those are good. And number two, and as far as the can do attitude, I draw the parallel with the site owners. We work with site owners across the country. I'm one myself, brand new startup, right? So I'm doing everything. Like, there's a lot of value in having done the work yourself prior to
Yeah,
hiring and training others. I tell my coordinator all the time, I've everything I'm asking you to do, I've done before. I know exactly what it feels like. I've done everything. But you have some site owners who start out and they're like, hey, I'm just going to hire people because I don't know how to do it. So I'm a hire experienced coordinator. Well, that works too. You can be successful that way. But there is, like you said, value in doing it yourself, even if it's for 3 or 6 months, right?
yeah,
Just actually doing it yourself so you can write the SOPs from a practical, pragmatic approach, not from like a academic approach. Like, this is
that's right.
how a consent will be done. Well, that's very nice, but have you done one?
That's right.
Because how do you know you can do this?
That's right. Yeah, exactly. I think this is really important, and not just also the SOP, but just yeah, like you said, just being empathetic and understanding like how the work gets done. I think that's really critical. Um, yeah, I think a lot of people struggle with that because they're just quick to say, oh, like, let's just give it to someone else to do it.
I love that. Give it to someone. You're number three, also from the willingness to communicate. I mean, like you said, usually that's a management issue. I agree with you. You have to make a culture as a manager. You have to make a culture of where people want to share, not just tell you what they think you want to hear. Um, Having worked at big pharma and startup biotech, right, medical device, who do you think's done a better job, or do you think it's the same, or does it vary as far as like creating this culture? because I think the bigger the companies get, the harder it is to keep that culture. But
That's right.
I don't know what your take on this is because I've never been in this situation.
I think it's a mess on both sides. It's just different kind of mess.
Ah,
Because I think in the big companies, there's always going to be some political jokers there trying to, make things very hard to maneuver. Even if you're at a CRO, but you still have to work at with a sponsor, there's always some sort of political thing going on with the big farms, any big company. With a small company, I think the issue is lack of experience and expertise at the startup. Not like they have a smaller team, so they have fewer people. The caliber and the quality uh, of decision making might not be as good as
yeah.
as a bigger company. Um, so I think I actually don't know to answer to your question. I feel like it's I've always felt like you can never escape from your problems. Like you're gonna have some new challenges.
Sure.
If you leave one job to go to another job or one role to another role, there's always gonna be something that's going to not be perfect.
Always, always. Same exact thing when you're a site owner. The challenges when you're a new site is lack of resources, basically common denominator, lack of revenue to hire more resources, so it all falls on the owner's shoulders. When you get bigger, you get different things. Like you get some coordinators. I had one client today. Okay, actually, Chris talked to them. They have a coordinator that's been screen failing patients on purpose because they don't want more work. Right? I mean, this is real stuff. Industry, you'll never hear this at a Socra or any of these
Mm,
SCRS talking
mhm.
about this stuff, but it's real problems that site
Mhm.
owner like, and this is a site that does well. And this is a
Yeah,
problem now. They traded their problem from lack of resources to now motivating employees, it looks like, or training or finding, in my
yeah,
opinion, it's finding the right employees because that's not acceptable no matter what. You're dealing with
that's right.
patients who could benefit from a study that you're not letting them be in the study. It's ridiculous because you're working too much. I could go off on a rant, but you're trading
I'm not
problems.
surprised.
You, you're trading one problem for another. So speaking of problems that you have and fires you got to put out, project management, right? I get asked this all the time and I have no answers because I've never been project manager. I
Mm,
have so much respect for project managers because I don't know
mhm.
how they do it all, right? Like anytime, is this true or false? Um, Anytime there's a problem with a site, a sponsor, a CRA, or just about any like a vendor, the first person they complain to is the project manager.
Uh, that is true, but I think it's also a project management issue because if the project manager manages it or sets clear, how do you call this? I think the issue is project managers are not empowering their teams to do their job. So let me kind of slow down that, like say that very slowly. Basically, what happens is if you're a project manager and you know that these are some of the common problems that happen, like in your life, like say budget, right? Say there's a financial discussion with the clinical trial site and you're going back and forth. The contracts person is going back and forth with the site, and the site is saying, oh well, I can't, I need $5,000, you're only paying 4,000. Then this contracts person will go to the project manager and say, well, this site is asking 5,000. And then the project manager will be like, no, well, why don't you offer 4,500? And then the contracts person goes back to the site, and then the site says, no, I still need 5,000. And then the contracts person goes back to the project manager. They're just wasting time on emails, communication, all this crap. So I think as a project manager, if you can set up a process where you are giving your contracts person the authority to make decisions, like giving some parameters and saying, here are the three tiers. Like if they come back with 5,000, then go to up to 4,300. If they come back with 5,000, go back up to 4,700. And if nothing works, just agree anything up to 5,500. So
Mm,
as long as it's up to 5,500 and that's the limit, then the CRA or the contracts person can just agree to that budget and just move on. And they don't have to come back to the project manager. I think the project managers are just themselves making it harder for them to do a good job or just being overwhelmed. You
But
know,
why? Because the way you explain it makes so much sense. But then why don't they do that? Like,
oh, it's about control because I think
uh,
the project managers may want to not lose control on their budget. You know, they're focused on, you know, the $1,000 that you're going to pay more on the startup fee. It's not a whole lot of money, guys. I mean, yeah, it might be a lot of money for the project manager based on, you know, like their income, but for a big sponsor, even a small company, it's not like a big amount, you know, in the whole scheme of things. I think you're going to spend thousands and thousands of millions of dollars on running a clinical trial,
a
or
million a
hundreds of
day.
thousands, hundreds of thousands. I mean, even a small clinical trial can be, you know, a couple $100,000. Like, I'm just, you know, I'm giving very general information, but it can add up pretty quickly, is what I'm trying to say. So I think you're counting pennies when you should be focused on the big dollars.
Hmm.
You know, so I think if a project manager kind of like knows, you know, their role is to really focus on the big ticket items, you know, and kind of really understand those,
Wow.
rather than having to be on the minutia, because then you're just exhausting the hell out of. I mean, it's just so exhausting because you're like you said, you're constantly getting beat up by or asked questions by the team members.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't know how they do it. Like as a contract CRA, the few interactions I've had with a PM, if I had an issue, I have to go to the PM. I almost felt bad to do it because I know all the other stuff they have to deal with.
so be it. I mean, they gotta figure this out. You know,
Why do they want to micromanage? Is it just inherently like what it takes to be in that role, or are they
well, it's
given
because
like a
mhm.
incentive from the sponsor? Like for example, budget to save $1,000. Does the sponsor give the PM incentive like, hey, you get a yearly bonus if you save like
No,
no?
no. There's no such thing that I'm aware of.
So why is the incentive like
Well, they kind of want. They feel like they have to make a decision, and they have to be good stewards of the cash
mm,
that they've been allocated to run this trial, and they don't want to burn the cash. So they're going to try to save every penny because then they feel like they're disloyal or doing a disservice to their organization by
wow.
paying more. Um, I think one mindset shift for the project managers would be to always remember that the sites are the ones that are helping you succeed. If this trial is a success and if it enrolls really well, if there's less compliance issues, then it's because of that site coordinator. It's because of that site PI that helped you be successful. So if that means paying them what's fair and what they're asking for based on whatever scenario or situation they're in, like maybe they're in a high job, you know, like they're in San Francisco, it's expensive, and you know they're charging you $1,000 more per patient than in, you know, middle of nowhere, you know, that's
Yeah.
not going to charge you that much. I'm just saying, I think if keeping that mindset really makes it easy for you to make decisions as a project manager, like on the financial side. Um, the sponsors could care less, honestly. I just feel like I've worked at Abbott, and we just never like that was never like a big. I mean, yes, money is important, and patient costs are 1/3 of the overall trial costs, roughly speaking. Um, so yeah, you want to not go over budget. But what would you do? Would you rather go over budget, or would you rather end your trial on time? It's a question you have to ask yourself. Like, what is it that you want? Like, how much are
Right.
you going to spin your wheels on, like make a decision and move on, right?
So as a PM or like a director or like
Mhm,
a CTM, right, clinical
mhm,
trial
mhm,
manager,
mhm.
people in these kind of positions, um, are you like would a sponsor or maybe higher ups look at the metrics and say, hey, Kunal was involved in these three studies where we finished on time
Of
versus
course.
someone else who didn't, and then
Of
so they
course.
request you more often or
Of
like
course.
yeah,
You got it. Yeah. I think if you're going to produce results for your organization, then your leadership is going to want you to take on more projects. And you are going to be the first person that comes to your mind because you're driving for results. Yes, sometimes it's a little more expensive, but in the whole scheme of things, it's a wash. Because you've kind of come out ahead by really launching your trial faster and getting your product approved faster, getting it on the market faster. There's so many things,
right.
that are high value than saving $1,000 in startup fee.
Yeah, when you put it in that perspective, yeah, it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, I'm not trying to say like you just agree to everything that the site is saying, which is why you want some parameters that you're going to have, uniform parameters. Um, I mean, I worked on a project not too long ago, and our budget was like, say, $800 a patient, and now we're like, okay, well, once I came back and said it's too low, they said, well, the best we could do is $1,400 a patient. What are you gonna do? They've
Right.
done all the math, and they come back with saying this is what it's gonna cost.
Mm.
What is the sponsor gonna do? They kind of have to make up their mind. If they really want the study to enroll, they need to readjust um their budget to meet that requirement. And honestly, like, money is just, it's money. I mean,
It's
I
just
think,
one lever, I
yeah,
think.
it is, yeah.
Yeah, because like using the example of the site, who has like a apparently overworked coordinator. I mean, makes no difference to them if that budget was 1 million a patient, like maybe that amount would be enough for the owner to do the work themselves. So
True.
maybe it would make a difference, but like within reason, you're not going to
That's right.
get like a change just from 20% or 30%. I mean, you
Correct.
still do you have other issues involved, like coordinators needing to do the work. When you get involved, like as a PM or even like a director of like a clinical trial manager, for example,
Mm-hmm.
let's say there's a site that is very behind on answering queries,
Hmm.
on study startup. They've just been behind on everything. But they enroll enough patients to where you can't give up on them. You need them. But they're just like very behind. What do you do like as a PM? Yeah, you've
I
been
would
in
I
this
would pause I would pause enrollment and say, hey, let's just take a break for 2 weeks so you can catch up and get all your work done, and then resume enrollment again. Because and I know people think, oh, my boss or my leadership or the sponsor is never going to agree to this. But would you rather have incomplete data or have more patients? Because your incomplete data is useless. It's money down the drain.
right.
You just give that site some breathing room, let them catch up, and then they can resume again. And I think it should be a mutual decision with the site. It shouldn't be something that the trial manager takes it by him or herself. Like, they need to have a conversation with the site and go through some options and say, well, does it make sense to pause your site? Does it make sense to add another resource, a research coordinator? Do you want like a CRA from our end to come and help you with any of the tasks that we can help you with? uh, you know, maybe it could be a variety of things that you could do. Can we assign you a part-time coordinator that can work with you for a
Mm.
couple of weeks or a couple of months so that you can get that extra support? Like, just everything is on the table. Nothing is off the table. So because for that side, it might hurt their ego if you say, well, we're going to pause enrollment. They're like, well, am I not good enough that you're going to stop enrollment at my site? I'm doing such good work, and you're actually now telling me to stop? And they might take it very personally. So you kind of have to think through like all the different scenarios with them and make a joint decision. Like, don't make a decision. I think I spend more time making joint decisions, and I have, like, obviously I have a direction that I want to head into, but I'm actually more focused on the outcome and not necessarily the options that we end up selecting.
Yeah.
As long as we get to that final outcome of complete data entry and high quality data, and so on.
What if you have like a site, let's say enrollment's over, and you have a site that's done very well, but now enrollment's over, and so they're like old queries now, aging queries,
Mm,
and just not being very responsive. So it means the coordinator's probably being utilized for other studies that
that's
you have
right.
no control over. Like, what would you do in that case? Have you had to have like
Of
heart to
course.
heart
Mhm.
conversation with sites before? Like,
Of course. Yeah. So it's a very common problem. I think it can happen. So I think if you're thinking about this after the study is over, it's too late, or after enrollment is over, because I think you should be thinking about it during the contract phase, where all your payments are based on the completion of the case report form. So they're not getting paid if they're not completing the case report form. Okay. So that's number one. Well, say you screwed up on your contract, whoever somebody did the contract, it wasn't set up that way. All the payments have been made, and you still don't have the data that you need, right? In that case, I think you should definitely seriously consider visiting the site.
You
and
yourself, the PM, or
yeah, I think you as a PM should visit the site, and maybe you go with your CRA, and say, hey, coordinator and PI, we're concerned about the data. You guys have obviously enrolled so many patients. We want to make sure your hard work and every patient you've enrolled in the study actually counts towards the final data set, which obviously they want, right? They want their patients to count towards the data set. We really need to come out and really have a plan. We need to have a joint discussion on how are we going to catch up on this open items, and then maybe set up micro goals. Like at the end of a month, this is what we're going to do. At the end of
Mhm.
2 months, this is where we're going to be. At the end of 3 months, this is where we're going to be. Like, don't go in there and say, I need this to be done yesterday. Like, it's not going to fly if you do that. But
Right.
yeah, I think the PM needs to get themselves on the plane and fly out to the site. You really need to invest that time to meet
Wow.
with the site. I mean, you could do a phone call, and I've done phone calls before, and they work just fine. But you probably need somebody else on the site from the sponsor, who's physically at the site with there's some regional CRAs that could like be at the site, so the PM doesn't have to travel. But I'm telling you, that $1,000 trip is going to pay you huge dividends because you've now set the stage for what the expectations are, and then you kind of work towards that.
Yeah, there's definitely some there's definitely like sends a strong message to the site when the PM comes in with the CRA or a lead comes in with the CRA and says, "Look, I mean, we got to fix this thing. That signals this is not a normal event. Like you don't just go to every site." And
Yeah,
which sites have been best to work with in your experiences so far? Is it the AMCs, academic medical center? Is it the small mom and pops?
I think all the projects that I've worked on just required academic medical centers, not maybe also private institutions, because we needed a cath lab, and it was like a big infrastructure. Because if I was doing cardiology trials, then we needed we needed a cath lab where they could perform the stenting procedure, for example.
Right.
So if they're, but I think personally, in my experience, the big sites are terrible. Like the academic, like the big hospital names, they're just
Wow.
full of. I mean, I think they're very difficult to work with because they have very convoluted processes and people and teams and departments and legal, reviews of the contracts. I mean, this is they just make you go in circles for a very long time. So I find the smaller institutions are the worker bees, but you still need like the big names because your CEO, your head of research, or your marketing VP cares about having a big name hospital on the final paper that gets published.
Yeah, it
You
moves the
know,
stock price. You
yeah.
know.
Well, even if it doesn't move the stock, yeah, it gives up. It's a good impression. I mean, if it's a private company, it still gives like that wow factor. It's like, oh well, you had Vanderbilt on your trial. It's like a big
Right.
deal. Or you had Boston, Medical Center on your trial, whatever the case may be. I'm not saying though any of the sites are bad. I'm just saying,
It's just an example.
example, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think this is a big mistake. I think the leadership makes at the sponsor side is they end up wanting these big names but then everybody wants these big names.
Right.
So as a clinical trial manager, your job is to educate your management. It's like, hey, I agree we need big names, but let's also have the small names on your trial list, because it's the small names that are going to. It's not that these people are less important. They just will contribute better because they have more focus, attention, they have resources to get a trial enrolled. And this is all assuming that they have the resources and the infrastructure to conduct the trial. But I'm a huge proponent of smaller centers because I just feel I could do more with them and get them like moving in the direction I'd like the project to move.
Yes, I would tend to agree, although not from a PM side standpoint, but just from my limited experience as a contract CRA and then as a consultant to sites, like the smaller the better. Small is the new big. I always tell people this now, especially in 2021 world, 2022 world going forward. Or this year is almost done, guys. 2022 is coming up. Um, okay, I think we covered some good topics. I mean, we can go on forever about the nuances of how to get sites to change their behavior and things like that. I mean, recruitment's always one of the biggest things, right? Recruitment and retention. There's not really ways you can, as a PM or a director. I mean, there's only so many levers you could pull, right? Like you can activate more sites, maybe.
Well, there's many things you can do to boost recruitment, but that would be like a much longer conversation. I just did an interview with Liam at the Endpoint podcast, so I think people can check it out on patient recruitment. I think specifically we talked about. I think there's a lot of things the PM can do. Actually, the PM has
Really?
more. I think that if I was to if I was a PM, I would spend 30% of my time on recruitment, 30% of time on the financials, and 30% of time on everything else.
Like operation and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
Or whatever, 40%.
33.
Yeah, 30, yeah, 1/3.
So what is like some levers, just really quick?
Real quick, yeah, obviously you said sites, right? You could increase the number of sites. You could increase the budget. Uh, you could pay for
Ah,
screen failures. You could that you weren't paying before. You could set up teleconferences with sites like webinars and so on. You could have better better quality. I think the quality of communication is also very terrible from the sponsor side, like updating sites on progress on your trials and where things are headed, because that just tells the sites that your study is still alive. Because otherwise, sites are busy. They have a lot of trials going on. You could do site visits, things we talked about. As a PM, it was one trial I worked on. I visited 33 sites in like course of the year and just met with every site, kind of discussed the workflow at every site and really figured out what are the bottlenecks at that site and how can we improve the workflow to increase patient enrollment, because every site is going to have slightly different issues that they're facing. So just kind of figuring that out. Yeah, I think just I try to avoid blanket demands from sites when you're trying to boost patient recruitment. Like send me a screening log every week, whatever. I think maybe send me a screening log every week if you don't enroll one patient a week or something like that. So then at least then the ones that are enrolling a patient a week, they don't need to send you a screening log because they've
right.
already met their
It's an
goal.
incentive to do it, just to
Do
not
it.
do the screening log.
Exactly. So that way it's kind of like, okay, it's a relief for the sites that are meeting
Yeah,
their
because then if you
goals.
get to Friday, you're like, hey, we better find somebody to screen just so I don't have to do this.
Yeah, the other levers is just shutting down sites that have not enrolled any patients.
Hmm.
I think that sends a big message to all these sites that, hey, if you don't have your act together,
Mm.
we're gonna really turn off enrollment and end our contract with your site, and that's okay.
Do you put
It's
that in the newsletter, or like how do you say that in a nice way to still send that message?
you actually have you could create what was the name? I'm trying to think about basically you try to create a plan where you say week 1 we want you to do this, week 2 you want you to do this, week 3 we want you to do this, and after week 4 you still haven't enrolled a patient, then let's kind of mutually agree that we will end your trial. But when you have your initial conversation with the PI and the RC, you set up a call and say, it's been 8 weeks, you haven't enrolled a patient, can we do this? We can probably go on for another 4 weeks. We want to make sure that this project is actually of value to you and your site. You're putting in a lot of effort, you're screening patients, but you're not seeing any results. Can we maybe hit certain milestones every week? And if we're not headed in that direction, maybe it's mutually beneficial for you guys to not be part of this trial.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then they'll be like, yeah, why not? Like because they don't want to waste their time either, right? It's not like
Yeah, that's an interesting lever. But I was saying, how would you communicate that to the other sites, like that you've shut down some sites without being tacky?
oh, I
Like,
see. I see.
or or just
I
word spreads because it's small industry? You think?
No, I don't know if the word spreads. I think I'm trying to think if I actually communicated that to the other sites. I think I would say that I think when you're just working with quality sites and you're trying to boost their enrollment and your resources are more focused in that direction, so
Yeah.
automatically it kind of raises your enrollment rate. So when you're sending the enrollment newsletter to your sites, it shows that your rate has climbed, and you can motivate them and say, "Hey, thank you. You guys have been doing a great job." They may not realize like you closed a few sites. I don't think you should shame the sites you've closed. I think that would be a very bad move
Game of
on
Thrones shaming,
yeah,
shaming.
yeah, shaming is probably not a good idea. But yeah, I don't know if I would communicate about this. I think we can say I think this would be a one-on-one communication with the sites that are not performing. So getting rid of underperforming sites is what I would focus on.
Mm,
And I think a lot of people just don't want to do that. It's like firing an employee.
yeah.
Nobody wants to do that, and it's actually because I think you've also invested so much emotional and time and labor and money and to get a site up and running that you don't want to cut your losses. But in some ways, it actually makes sense to do that.
Yeah, especially if you're spending like money on central ad campaigns, now that money, those leads can be going to sites that
That's right.
have a better chance of following up
Succeeding.
on the leads. Yeah. Because I was talking to Ivan earlier. He's a social media recruiter. And I was telling him, hey, when I go to these conferences, these big ones, I meet with all the recruitment vendors. And one of their biggest issues is not a tech problem. It's my sites are not following up on the leads we're
That's
sending.
right.
That's
Yeah.
not a tech problem that I can think of.
Yeah, I can empathize with that. I think it's very hard. Like I'm trying to hire some serious and I have so many job applicants, like I can't even go through these. There's just so
CRA,
much
you're doing
CRAs. Yeah.
wow.
And I'm just like struggling to be honest to keep up with like screening calls and I don't have a recruiter who can kind of screen them at
Mm.
this point, so I'm doing it all by myself and it's been quite a bit of work to say the least.
But they're in demand now. CRAs are in huge demand, no?
Yeah, I think, but they, like you said, they were always in demand even
Yeah,
before the pandemic, right?
yeah.
So it's not that they were not in demand back then, right?
But do you feel like when you find a very good one that you have to jump all over her or him or someone else will get them? Or like how does that feel for you?
I personally, for me, I don't want to make decisions in a rush. So I would probably, yes, I want to be, try to get an offer out in like a couple weeks. But I want to go through the interview process personally. I don't want to
Mhm.
like, oh, this guy's getting a job offer, and hence I need to kind of make a decision like ASAP. I don't
Yeah.
know if I feel like that because I really want everybody to kind of go through the process. Like, there's some things that we want to make sure. And if they really want this job, and I think it's not just about a job, but it's also like there are prospects. Like if you're working for a private company, there might be some upside with some stock ownership, and maybe you care about that more than you care about, a higher pay right now, or just getting an offer that's out there, but you're not like really considering the whole package.
That's
You're,
awesome. I
yeah,
would. I
yeah,
would.
you really want to think about all these different things, which I think people are just very short-sighted. I think about that Marshmallow experiment that I don't know, it's been widely published, I guess, where
Yeah.
they gave these marshmallows to these kids and they said, well, if you wait for 5 minutes and you can have two, but people just want to eat that freaking marshmallow and they don't want to wait for extra
Right.
5 minutes to eat two marshmallows.
Get the bird
So
in the hand.
yeah, exactly. So I think CRAs need to be a little more strategic. Like yeah, don't just take on a job. And also, I think if you keep changing a lot of jobs all the time, I don't know if it really looks good on your
Mm.
resume. And also, I don't know if you are actually giving it your 100% to a given role. I personally feel like I am. I feel like I quit on something. I just threw in the towel because I didn't give it my full energy and time and soul and you know
Right.
like I want to give it my 100%. I don't want to do a half-hazard job and then like, oh, let's go to the next shiny object, if that makes sense.
But by that same token, I mean, and thank you for your time. We're gonna wrap up right now. By that same token, I tell all the CRAs, majority of them work for big CROs, right? So
Mm.
a lot of them, and the CROs are getting better because they have to, not because they're nice people. They have to retain their CRAs, but um, a lot of them are stressed out with their CRO, and many go on to sponsor roles and seem to love it. Um, so, what advice do you have for a CRO out there? Let's say they're working for one of the big CROs and they're just miserable with their workload. Like, do you recommend sponsor side?
Absolutely. Any day of the week. I would not work for a CRO because, and I'm not saying never, but at this point in my career and
Right.
my personal belief is that a CRO is a very service driven industry. A sponsor is a very product driven industry. What I mean by that is a sponsor sells medical products, drugs, devices, biologics, so on. CROs are selling human services. They're selling people's time, right? And sponsors, I think it's just a tough model that the CROs have because the sponsors are always going to be demanding and they have to constantly like meet these sponsor expectations, right? When you work at the sponsor, doesn't mean you're a boss, but you still, I think you are more focused and you can participate in a lot of the upside of the medical product that gets sold. Versus at this, I don't know about the incentives at the CRO side aside from the bonus. I mean, yeah, maybe you get stock and so on, but I just don't. I haven't seen like private CROs going public and then they make a lot of money or whatever,
The
right?
CRAs never do. Yeah,
They
they
never
don't
do. Yeah,
participate.
that's why I think that's why it's more smart for a CRA to work for a sponsor. And I actually think it's more fun because you can learn a lot. I mean, you can learn that also on the CRO side, but on the sponsor side, you can learn about other parts to the medical product development cycle that you may not learn at the CRO. Um, so I think I realized that when I was at Parks. I think this whole service industry is very difficult.
Yeah,
It's like you're constantly trading time for money.
yeah.
And versus in the medical product side, if your product is awesome, if your data looks really good, then in the people are patients are benefiting from your product, then you're naturally going to as any employee, not just as a CRA, you're going to be benefiting from the upside that that company experiences.
I 100% agree with you. Thank you for that. If I were not an entrepreneur and I were employee, I would do sponsor. Like I would do what I need to do to get in. So if that's at a site or a CRO, that's fine. Maybe I would continue at the site level, but that leads into like entrepreneurship. So I'm not cheating. I would go sponsor level, right? Sponsor level for the reasons you just said. You could possibly get stock options. If you're really in demand, you can like you could start looking at their science, just like I do due diligence on the stock and say, okay, well, I have two choices here. I like this one. This is the science. This is, this one you can like kind of take a more strategic long-term look at what they're doing. So thank you for basically saying what I've been telling people, which is why are you miserable at a CRO? You've been there for like 7 years. Move on. Go to sponsors.
Yeah, but I also think some people are just not very good at because at the sponsors, really smaller sponsors, you kind of need to get your act together and you need to know
Mm,
you need to know your stuff inside out. Like I had to learn a lot of the things that at Abbott, maybe I didn't have to do that weren't part of my job.
mm,
But at the sponsor, it's a much, I mean, at a smaller company, it's a smaller team and I kind of have to like figure things out pretty quickly. And if I'm not good at what I'm doing, then I'll get fired. And then,
right.
I think it's a possibility. I just think people need to know that. Like you can't just, and I think that's where people at the CRO, they feel like they can do the monitoring or whatever very well. And then they don't need to worry about like really understanding a lot of other things, right? Because they're kind
Mm,
of aloof from the sponsor side. So even if the product fails or whatever, they don't have the skin in the game per se. They'll be just put on a different project at the
right.
CRO, right?
Right. Right.
Versus that the sponsor side, that's kind of your lifeline in some ways.
Yes. You can be an intrapreneur, um,
Yeah,
but basically working as if you are an owner. of the company, and some of
That's
these
right.
smaller ones you will be given stock options and different things like that. Um, Kunal, thank you very much. We're gonna have your LinkedIn profile underneath for anybody that everybody should go meet Kunal, network with him. Everybody go listen to Clinical Trial Podcast. It's a really well done podcast. You and Brad Hightower have really good like podcasts. I can't think of others in the space that do podcasts, but you, Brad, and then myself, where I'm just throwing up a bunch of shots at the basket. You have different choices now in clinical research, and you get different perspectives. Kunal brings a brand new, fresh perspective that we've never seen actually from sponsor side. I don't think anyone has been as open as you, as far as I'm aware,
Probably not.
from a sponsor side.
Yeah, yeah, probably not. I don't think so. I think people are just generally not willing to share.
Were
I
you
don't.
were you afraid when you started? Like, did you have people telling you, "Hey, that's dumb. You're gonna
Mm.
get fired, Kunal. What are you doing?"
I don't know if I asked for permission. I think what I did is I completed like a little book or something that I had called the Ship It Journal by Seth Godin. It's
Ah, love Seth
yeah,
Godin.
if you just Google a search, it's called the Ship It Journal, and I basically wrote everything that I would be scared of in that journal. And I think just writing it down kind of just got my fears out of the way, and then I just went all in. So and I think it was also the same time I'd started like to teach at San Jose State University, so I was
Mm,
quite excited about sharing information and ideas. I was having a very hard time at work, um, so I think that kind of gave me an outlet to not having to think too much about work and kind of focusing on whatever I needed to do outside. It was like just starting a blog, and people do that all the time. So, and my intent wasn't to make money or anything like that. It was just to spread information and knowledge.
mhm.
And I didn't feel like anybody could stop me from doing that.
I like that. I like that. Well, everybody go follow, go listen, go share, go comment, go subscribe to Kunal. And then if you would like, do the same under this podcast or YouTube video. Links in the show notes. Thank you very much, Kunal. We'll definitely do it again. I mean, hopefully not gonna take 3 years this time to do the
Yeah.
part three.
Yeah,
but
let's stay in touch. Yeah, I'm happy, and thank you for having me on your show, and thanks for the advice with starting a site, and I just appreciate your insights and your knowledge in this space. Because as you know, we're all coming from different backgrounds. Me knowing a lot on the sponsor side, you kind of being in the trenches on the site side, and kind of bringing it all together. And I just appreciate you being that resource.
thank you, thank you. Yeah, we can do it. Next time, focus more on the sites, so like make it more of an open podcast on that because there's a lot of people in that space too. So I think you're on
Yeah.
the right track with like I said in the beginning, becoming a generalist. I mean, that's an unattainable goal for everybody, but we can all strive towards that, and we'll get close. We'll get close enough, right? And that's
Yep.
that's at the end of the day what matters. So thank you, Kunal. Thank you everybody for watching and listening, and we'll catch you all later. Bye bye.